Hey guys, happy Tuesday. We're going to continue with volume today. This time, instead of just focusing on the difference between milliliter and liter, which if you need to review, you can go back to yesterday's lesson. We're going to actually work with liters today and measure it on a graduated cylinder and look at how we can see what number or what measurement it is. So here is a picture of two different types of cylinders. One is this is the one we're going to focus on, which is the thinner tube. But what I wanted you to look at each container is, what do you notice? Excuse me, I'm a little congested today. If you notice that they're both looking like the same measurement, and I will go into further detail, but they don't look the same, it's because of the type of container it is going in. Now, because this one is much shorter but wider, it looks like there is less. But that is not the case because this one is much thinner, so the liquid goes in, it reaches a higher level on the container, but that does not mean that it has more volume. Okay, so what we're looking here is, when we are looking at graduated cylinders, you want to pay attention to where the lines are and how they're counting by, because it's not always counting by ones. In fact, most of the time you wouldn't want it to count by ones because the lines would be so close together and you would have to really take notice on where the water is on, what line is it touching. So usually they count by twos, by fives, by tens, even if by 20s. Now you can see here, looking at these two, we have 4 lines, and this is what we're practicing today, being able to recognize what the container is counting by so that we can be able to recognize what number or liters is in the container. So as you can see here, there's 4 markers on this container. It's definitely not counting by ones, because if this marker, and if I have my pointer, if this marker right here is 20 liters, and then this marker, we don't know what it is, and then the next one jumps to 40, there's no way that we were counting by ones. So it's up to you to figure it out. Okay, so if we have 20 here, and then it jumps to 40, what could this or this one, what number could it be? If you said your tens, you are correct. So it's about being able to recognize what is missing here. So if this is 10, if we add another 10, yes, then it is 20. If we add another 10, would this be 30? Well, we can check our answer, because if we add another 10, it should be 40, and it is 40. So these, or both of them, are counting by their tens, which means this water line stops in between 20, and we now know that this is 30, even though it's not labeled. You have to be able to recognize that. So if the water line is in between 20 and 30, this is where our estimating goes on. Is it halfway? Or if we're in between 2 tens, what's the halfway point? And that's where our rounding comes in. What was the peak of those mountains, guys? What's the midpoint? And I would say it's relatively in the middle of 20 and 30. So my choice would be, my estimate would be, that's 30 liters. Okay? So here you go is another one. Mrs. Hassan used liters to fill the container with water for a science project. She asked Ryan and Steven to estimate how many liters are in the container. So we're estimating here, guys. Ryan estimated that the water was 40 liters, and Steven estimated that the water was about 50 liters. Who is correct in their estimation? So if you said Steven, then you were correct, because if we look at the red line here, closely look at this. First, let's recognize, what is this container counting by? Well, we have 20, and then they have a line here, then they go to 40, and then they have a line here. Then they go to 60 and a line here. Those lines still count, and you should be counting them. This container is counting by 10 liters each. So if this is 20, this is 30, where my red line is, which would make this 40 if we're counting by tens. And since it is 40, then that is how I prove that we are counting by tens. This would be 50. So Ryan says it's 40, but Steven said it's 50. The reason Steven is correct is if we look at where the red line is, it is much closer to the 50 milliliter line. Okay? Now, if we were in class right now, we would be using actual water, and you would see that the bubble on the top actually has a curve when we put water in. It's not a perfect straight line. But for purposes of doing virtually, you'll see it perfectly straight. Sometimes the water does curve, and you always go off the bottom bubble. But that's just a side note. We want to go to whatever is the closest. The exact measurement would still be an estimate. I would say it would be 49 or even possibly 48 liters, just because of how close it is to 50. Now, the practices today, I won't put it like that where you would be guesstimating, but excuse me, guy. It would be on the exact line. So this is something that you will have today, and you will be looking at graduated cylinders and writing the amount. Now, for purposes, this one is labeled milliliters. For all your answers, I want you to put milliliters, just for the simple fact that when you guys have graduated cylinders in person, we remember milliliters are much smaller than liters. There's no way I would be, well, we can, but we would not be using graduated cylinders that would be carrying 100 liters, because we know that that's extremely large amount. So we're going to look at this as practice, and then you guys are going to go on to do your independent practice. So let's look here. Look at A. Now, looking at A, we have to first, step one is always figuring out what the graduated cylinder is counting by. That is always step one. You cannot assume it's counting by ones. You have to figure it out by counting how many lines are in between the numbers that they do provide. So this first one, they gave us only 3 numbers, 10, 20, 30. But the water, and you can see it's a little curved here because they're giving a more realistic water. That's how the water would be on a graduated cylinder. So now, if there's only 3 numbers, how am I supposed to figure out what this is counting by? Well, I'm going to count the lines in between those numbers. How many lines will tell me what the cylinder is counting by. So here we have 10, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then it goes to 10 when we hit 20. So obviously there's 10 spaces, or we are counting by tens, which means these are counting by tens, but those in-between lines are actually counting by ones, because we can see all the 9 lines here. So this one is probably the most simple graduated cylinder, because you just have to count from each point. So if this is 10, we're going to count up 11, 12, 13, and that is 14 mLs or 14 milliliters, and you see the answer down there. One clue is this line here is a little longer than the 4 below it and the 4 above it. Why do you think that line is a little bit longer? If you said it's because it's the midpoint, that's correct. Oh, I have really bad allergies today, guys. The midpoint is 15. So it's less than 15, so we know that the answer here is 14 milliliters. All right, let's look at the next one. Here again, where we see the multiples of 10 happening. This time, this graduated cylinder is going up to 50. Is it still counting by ones? Let's see here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The midpoint's taller. 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so this is also counting by ones with the multiples of 10 being the highlight on the graduated cylinder, but you can still count by ones. So instead of having to start down at 0, you want to go to the closest multiple of 10, which is up here, which is 40, and then you can simply count from 40, 41, 42. So this B is 42 milliliters. And don't forget to label ml after you put the number in your practice. And in your practice sheet especially, I will accept just the number on the exit slip as correct though. But I want you to practice writing it on your independent practice sheets. All right, this one's a little different, guys. Obviously, we know it's not counting by ones because there are only 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the fifth one is 25. So there's 5 spaces before we get to the next number, which is 50, and then the next number, which is 75. Well, these are not multiples of 10, but could they be multiples of 5? These are the questions you want to ask in your head. You have to make smart estimations. So could it be 5? Well, if this were 5, this would be 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. So right now my theory is correct. Let me just double check by counting up to 50 in my 5s. So if this is 25, this is 30, 35, 40, 45, and 50. So this one is counting by 5s. Now that we know that, we can find our closest point before going to the water, which is 75. And from that point, we will count by 5s. 75, 80, 85, 90. So this graduated cylinder is 90 milliliters. And the last one before you practice, we just move me right over here. We see, oh, they're going 100, 200, 300. We're going in the hundreds. So that doesn't mean we're counting by hundreds. Let's see the lines here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then we get to 100. I can tell already it's counting by tens, guys. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, the midpoint, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. Check your work, count it. Will it make sense? If we say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, how did it get from 9 to 100? That doesn't make any sense. So now we know these are counting by tens. So the closest one we have here is 200. We're going to go 210, 220, 230, 240, and 250 milliliters. Okay, so you're going to practice today. Make sure step 1, you figure out what the graduated cylinder is counting by. Once you know the measurements, verify that it is correct by counting and seeing if it makes sense, and then go ahead and see if you can determine the measurement. Make sure you're putting ml afterwards in your sheet. There's a good 2 or 3 of you. I have messaged you. Check your emails. If I haven't messaged you, you're doing great. But there's a good 2 or 3 constantly skipping independent practice and just going to the exit slip, and it is showing in your grade on the exit slip because you're not getting those correct. I don't need to name names, but keep in mind, since this is what we are doing for the next 6 weeks, participation is very important. And if you skip the independent practice, I cannot give you full credit participation for that day or even that week. So I want to make sure you guys are aware. You don't have to be correct. I just need effort. So make sure you are completing the independent practice, and if there is an exit slip for that day. All right, I will see you guys Wednesday. I hope you guys have a good day.